what exactly is the role that is, envisaged for a governor in the constitutional scheme of things? Manu, please.
Thank you, RK, for inviting me to speak, but really thank you, Frontline and RK, for hosting this very important conversation this evening. It seems that almost as if by some divine or otherwise intervention that we keep coming back to discussing the role of the governor and the role that the governor must have within the framework of the constitution every so often. It seems to be a recurring theme, at least amongst Tamil Nadu and Tamil media. And it is not something that is completely new to our political discourse. In fact, I have with me a copy of the 1974 inquiry report on center state relations, the 1971 report, which was commissioned by the government of Tamil Nadu, wherein they have made some serious inquiry into the functions and the duties and the roles of a governor. And it is quite strange that 50 years hence we are still discussing this. Nevertheless, I will sort of try to touch upon three issues that I think have been recurring themes over the last 50 or so years, and try to draw from that some level of solace and some level of constitutional direction, which will, I think, hopefully help us navigate in the years to come. If you remember, some years ago, the Bharatiya Janata Party had promised a political slogan to us. They called it maximum governance, minimum government. Uh, I've often said they probably meant to say maximum governors and minimum governance. And this is something that I do not say lightly, but having observed over the last many years, uh, RK, you had briefly spoken about Governor R. N. Ravi, but if I can just recollect some of the earlier governors that we have had in and around the states of, in the southern states especially, we've had Justice retired P. Sadasivam, the first Chief Justice of India to have been made a governor of a state. And it was quite ironical that one of the ordinances Justice P. Sadasivam, when he was governor, he promulgated came to be stayed by the Supreme Court, which he headed only a few years before that. We had retired IPS officer Kiran Bedi. We had Mr. Banwarilal Purohit, who I believe still, has been sort of passing remarks about the state of Tamil Nadu and the appointment of vice chancellors, which we'll come to no doubt in a short while.
Much to the delight of your party, may I add.
Absolutely. I mean, it is to the delight of all of us, because as a governor, when he was here, he didn't utter a single word about these apparent irregularities or illegalities, but has now found it fit to speak about something which apparently had happened a few years ago. Nevertheless, we also had interesting roles played by, if you remember, Keshari Nath Tripathi in Bihar, who swore in a Nitish Kumar breakaway government when Nitish Kumar and the Janata Dal United broke away from the Mahagathbandhan as it was then. And you had Vidyasagar Rao in Tamil Nadu, if you remember, who brought OPS and EPS together very symbolically holding hands. You also had Mr. Koshyari, who tried to swear in Mr. Devendra Fadnavis at 5 a.m., one of the, I think, the first pre-dawn swearing-ins we've had since we all heard about the famous midnight speech of Jawaharlal Nehru, Tryst with Destiny. So nevertheless, we've had an interesting sort of gamut of governors. And, when you have interesting governors, you have interesting sort of decision-making processes. And the Supreme Court and the various high courts of this country have been kept quite active, trying to sort of restrain the various governors. I mean, there's numerous cases in the last few years where the actions of various governors have been called into question, and how they have tried to form government, or how they have tried to unform governments. But let me begin with, for those of you, who still are wondering what sort of interesting people become governors. The governor is one of the few appointed or nominated posts in the country, which is recognized by the constitution. The governor is appointed because the constitutional article 161 says the governor is appointed by the president under his warrant and seal. Now, there's an interesting sort of um, backstory here. When the Constituent Assembly was first debating how a governor should be chosen or selected, the first model or first option proposed by the Constituent Assembly was that the House would suggest three names, and then the president would select one of those names. Um, and while discussing the appointment or nomination of governor, they had a rethink to say whether they should be an elected person or not. In fact, one of BJP's newfound idols, Sardar Patel, who was at that time one of the leading members of the Constituent Assembly, he had suggested that the governor must be elected. But once they realized that the governor is really only a nominal post, and in the words of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he says the governor is pretty much a person who will have absolutely no discretion. So that is the reason they decided not to make the governor post one through election. Because Dr. Ambedkar says, who would stand in an election if it is only going to result in a post where there is absolutely zero power? So, which is why they did away with the election model, and they went with the model where a person would be nominated by the president. Now, so what the Constituent Assembly in itself envisaged is that a governor would be someone who would only be appointed or nominated by the president, and would have zero discretionary power. So that's the first sort of takeaway I want to give to people who are wondering about governors. Now, flowing from that, the second important aspect of the governor is, if a person is just being nominated and has no real constitutional uh, role, then what are his or her functions? And in looking at that, we come to the only inevitable conclusion by reading the Constitution, and so as the Supreme Court through various judgments, most famously in Shamsher Singh versus State of Punjab 1970, that the governor must and shall only act in aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. As a country, as a constitutional democracy, we took over from the British the Westminster system, which is a cabinet form of government. So, in the constitution, the primacy has been given to the Council of Ministers. That is what we commonly now refer to as the cabinet. So, the cabinet is the ultimate decision making body. It has collective responsibility, and the cabinet is led by, in the case of the state, a chief minister, in the case of the union, the prime minister. So, when the cabinet is the ultimate authority and decision making body, the governor repeatedly has been held by the Supreme Court, has no discretionary power or function. The governor may only act in accordance, in adherence, and in furtherance to the decisions taken by the Council of Ministers. Now, this has most recently been reiterated by a three-judge bench of the Supreme Court in the case which Tamil Nadu at least is familiar to, that of AG Perarivalan, wherein the decisions of councils of ministers seeking to pardon Perarivalan, one of the Rajiv Gandhi convicts, was repeatedly delayed and thwarted by various governors, not one Mr. Ravi alone, but his predecessors also. So in that case, Justice L. Nageshwar Rao specifically wrote about how governors have zero discretion and were bound to follow whatever the Council of Ministers say or take as a decision making or as a policy making process. Now, of course, does that mean the governor has zero discretion? No, the governor has one part or one role which is part of his or her constitutional duties where there is a little bit of discretion, but this discretion is heavily limited and circumscribed. That discretion is that of the governor to call on the majority party to form government. Now, that is something that the Supreme Court cannot do. The average citizen like you and me cannot do. But that is something that is given to the governor because the governor should allow the formation of government typically after an election. But even that, I say, is heavily circumscribed or limited because various cases, mostly culminating in SR Bommai and thereafter, specifically say how the governor must call the person, call the party which enjoys majority or the coalition that enjoys majority in the assembly or parliament. So even there, the governor cannot, as Mr. Koshyari did, unfortunately, the governor cannot call a person of his or her choice, liking, but must go in accordance strictly with the diktats and the mandate of the Supreme Court. Now,
Yeah.
thirdly, my third point is, so the first point to recollect is the governor is just someone who's appointed or nominated by the president. The second point is that the governor has zero discretion, and the little discretion that they do enjoy is to do with the little constitutional discretion is that the governor must ensure that the right party or right person is called on to form government in accordance with the Supreme Court's directions. And the third point I want to make is what we have seen as a recent trend in governors, and it is especially one that is actuated heavily by malice. And I say this because you do not see these problems crop up in BJP governed states. Now, uh, last week, the governor of Kerala, as RK had alluded to, had called upon or issued a sort of a notification or a warning or a veiled threat to ask all the vice chancellors or some of the vice chancellors of some universities in Kerala to tender their resignation. Governor Arif Khan based this warning on a decision of the Supreme Court with regard to one particular university where the vice chancellor process was challenged. Now, this is interesting because earlier in the year or late last year, I forget when, uh, similarly, another vice chancellor's appointment was challenged in Gujarat, and the Supreme Court held that vice chancellor's appointment to be bad. Now, it is not anybody's recollection that the Gujarat governor had called all the vice chancellors therein to resign there. But it seems that wherever there is a non BJP governed state, and typically we may find more of those in the southern part of our country, we do tend to see a lot of the governors playing a little bit of a more aggressive and perhaps a constitutional overreach of a role when it comes to how they must exercise their powers. So that is why I find that there is many grounds to establish malice, not just in the recent past in Tamil Nadu, but even in other states where I had just mentioned, be it in Bihar, be it in Kerala, be it in Maharashtra, wherever the governors have been sort of been sent as agents of the union government. And I think that is particularly problematic. The constitution requires governors to be a bridge between the state and the union. We are a federal country, and we require governors to play a role bridging any sort of communication between the state and the union. But unfortunately, the governors have become agents of the union and have taken it upon themselves to offer remarks, offer comments, and speak out of turn, especially with regard to governance. The governors enjoy a constitutional role, but that is only nominal. It is not executive. So therefore, I think we are going to continue to see this issue crop up every time that there is a non-BJP governed state. It seems to be a particular modus operandi that is being used of late. The governors must remember that their own role as envisaged by the constitution is very limited, and if they do not do so, the ultimate arbiter are only two: one, the courts of this country, and two, the people of this country, because we are all ultimately bound by the constitution, and any sort of gubernatorial overreach will is something that I think the people will not take lightly, especially because the governors are overreaching against people who have been elected through extremely popular mandates, and therefore they must realize that they are going up against public opinion at large.
Pleasure to listen to all of those, Manu. Like uh, when the constitution was formulated, we see very clearly that Ambedkar and Nehru and everybody else went along with this idea of having governors in the state. Uh, I think with the benefit of hindsight and with what the government of India at that point of time with Pandit Nehru himself did to both Punjab and to Kerala, we can realize that governors were doing the job of agents of the central government right then. Now, we had a situation in Tamil Nadu where CN Annadurai, Anna for all of you, decided that this course, this particular post was absolutely unnecessary. Now, I'm a little, kind of flabbergasted that some person who was not in government at that point of time, but was a Rajya Sabha member and all of that, had the foresight to see that the governors can become extra constitutional authorities in each state, and what is playing out today, and we don't have the memory from say the 50s or the or the 60s and all of that, but can you place it in context? How did Anna come to this conclusion that governors were unnecessary?
Well, so there are, I think, there are a couple of ways to look at this. Firstly, I don't think it was a overnight conclusion or something that they had thought about at the spur of the moment. My first sort of document of reference, which I would call to be the Magna Carta of our Indian Constitution, is the Montague-Chelmsford reforms, which came to be placed in 1920, 1921. And at that time, I would argue that largely due to the active political participation of the then South Indian Liberal Federation, also known as the Justice Party, there was a uh, heavy and compelling sort of support for self-governance or local governance. This is captured in many of the submissions made by Justice Party leaders to the Montague-Chelmsford committee, as it was known then. Now, building on that, and as you know, when the first sort of diarchy elections were held, and the Justice Party came to power in 1920 and continued to govern the presidency of Madras till 1937, they really, I think, understood the power of local governance and what we now consider or call state autonomy and federalism. This was remarkable because in the 1920s, much before anybody else had even thought about it, Madras presidency was able to extend voting, was able to elect a woman to the assembly, was able to pass significant reforms to Hindu temple entry, and even promulgate a government order on reservation. So once they had sort of realized how much they could do, I think it was only natural that any particular proposition that stood in the way of self governance or local governance or federalism or state autonomy was seen to be problematic. And as Anna often said, it is a superfluous proponent to our constitution. It is constitution meaning our state legislative and executive framework. So that is why I think a lot of the early thinking around the Dravidian movement, which of course, to the extent of separatism, and then curbing it in 1961 when the 15th constitutional amendment came to be passed, where DMK changes its demands from a separate Dravida Nadu to a more federal setup or federal cooperation or cooperative federalism is what the demand of the DMK is changed to or amended to in 1961. And around that time, again, those of you who follow politics in Tamil Nadu may have heard this, but I will repeat it for everyone's pleasure and privilege, which is that Anna at that time said, though we have given up our demand for Dravida Nadu, many of the underlying reasons continue to remain. So, therefore, all through the 50s and 60s, which are the formative DMK years, and of course, the ascendancy of Anna from a breakaway party to putting it really on the political map of Tamil Nadu and then India. I think these concepts of federalism took deep root, and therefore I think when they saw that the governors could be misused, and of course the first 15-20 years it was only Congress governments in states as well as a Congress government in the union, but nevertheless I think they found that perhaps they didn't have any particular experience with a governor that we have these days around our country, but nevertheless I think they saw that the entire position of governor was superfluous and unnecessary to the constitutional framework and the executive setup of this country. And that is why I think the opposition to the governor, through the official appointment process, I think it was seen as an attack or an assault on our own independence. A governor was being nominated by someone sitting in Delhi. The people of Tamil Nadu or the people of any state really had nothing to do with selecting their governor. And I think that is really problematic. That is something the Rajamannar Committee, the 1971 report, also goes into. Of course, by virtue of having inherited the British Westminster system, we did think that it would be easy to have a person who replaced the monarchy, and that person should be one of our own. And of course, if that person is going to be unelected, at least it should be a person who is nominated or who is proposed by the state. I think that really was the policy of the DMK party back even in the 60s. So my answer to your question, RK, in a long-winded manner, I apologize for that, is that really the opposition to governors and sort of putting a person from Delhi into the political ticket of that state was always seen to be a move that would never go down well. And I think not just Anna, but I think many others who have in the past written against such sort of uh, dominance or predominance by the union government and the union cabinet and the president in appointing and nominating agents across the country. I think that has now been proven right. Their
Yeah.
concern is actually well made out. We have seen that instead of sort of enhancing the relations between the state and the union, governors have become those who are actually creating more problems for the state and the union. And I do not know if that is a part of the RSS agenda across the country, but it certainly seems to be something that isn't reaping rewards in Tamil Nadu.
Absolutely. I think what you said there makes perfect sense. the tendency of the RSS to make India a unitary state with one strong central government and the rest of the country and states being vassals of the center makes perfect sense. That is their idea, and that is what Golwalkar and, of course, Hedgeworth and all of them had written about also. They preferred the notion of a strong center and a unitary center to anything else, one language. And we see various manifestations of that, one tax and whatnot. Now, I come from a very different angle before going to that. My question is that, yes, the governors are saying so many things, which is one, embarrassing the state governments to the extent that the state governments are forced to respond with either someone from the cabinet or through some other spokespersons or whatever, which we have seen today in Tamil Nadu, where the industries minister is forced to respond to an allegation made by Governor R.N. Ravi, and we see in Kerala where the chief minister himself is forcefully responding to this completely difficult and unconstitutional demand of a governor to remove the possibly the third most important minister. In most setups, the finance minister is the second most important minister, but in the current setup in Kerala, he is the third most important minister. So we see that the governors have been embarrassing the states to the extent that they have to push back, they have to talk, they have to necessarily drag in the office of the governor into some kind of political slugfest. Now, since you are a person in politics, and since you obviously know a lot of the constitution, and since you have written so much of federalism, I come from this from a very different angle. What kind of reaction can political parties come up with, both legally and politically, to counter this? Is it even possible to counter this, number one? I'm not talking about the narrative wise, but I'm talking about the substance of what the governors are speaking and what the governors are trying to accomplish in these states. Is it possible to counter this, one, politically and two, legally? Thank you.
Well, I think there are many legal challenges that have been mounted over the last many years. And I think it's through these legal challenges, like I said, a lot of it happened around the power of uh, dismissal of state governments, which was exercised almost whimsically, arbitrarily, which culminated in the formulation of various principles in the S.R. Bommai versus Union of India 1994 case. So legal challenges have been forever going on. I think even recently, a series of judgments, mostly to with Northeast India, where again, governments were being turned overnight, political affiliations were being shifted and transposed, within a day to form governments where there were none. All of this has led to greater scrutiny of what governors must and must not do. Now, that is legally something that has been going on. It will continue to go every time there is a overreach. I think we hope that the courts of this country, the constitutional courts, will step in and protect the constitution, at the same time restrict the governors and give them some sort of a restraint. Politically, though, I think I think I must sort of admit that I feel the Constituent Assembly did not do enough to give enough functions for the governor. The Constituent Assembly, and I repeatedly, the remarks of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar are, quite interesting. He says the governor cannot exercise any function in his discretion or in his individual judgment, which means essentially, and I don't mean this in a demeaning manner, even Dr. B.R. Ambedkar thought the governor will only be a rubber stamp. It will be someone who will not have a mind, a constitutional mind of his or her own. So therefore, what have we done? I mean, these are people who we have given some authority, right? I mean, some grandiose, there's this big Raj Bhavan. There is, they get perks. They're, well taken care of. We regard them as the first citizen of our state, and if you're the president, first citizen of our country. But what have we done to them? We have given them, we have taken away all their sort of will to work and will to live. It's like, tomorrow, RK, we start this huge, multi-million dollar company, and we make someone the CEO, and then say, sorry, you can't do anything for the next, 3 years or 4 years. And somebody else will be actually running the company. And so, but please do sit, come in and sit and enjoy the seventh floor office, looking out to the beach or something. So therefore, it seems like we've not given them enough work, which is why I want to move to this other issue that all these governors have started taking up, like the Kerala governor and the Tamil Nadu governor of late. They've started exercising their statutory role. Their statutory role is that of a chancellor. Now, just to be very clear, governor has, according to me, a constitutional role, okay, which is as per the Constitution of India, where it is clear that the governor will be acting in aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. Now, there is a statutory role. What is the statutory role? Wherever there are laws where the governor has been made a member. So, if you take, for example, RK, the Anna University Act, it will say the chancellor of the university shall be the governor of the state. Okay, so you don't need any qualification to be a chancellor. Of course, now the recent issue that the Kerala governor picked up is with vice chancellors. Now, to be a vice chancellor, there's a lot of eligibility criteria. There's a lot of qualifications you need. But to be a chancellor, the irony is staring us in our faces. You don't need any qualification. All you need to be is to be appointed governor. You could be someone who has no idea of education, for example, no idea of higher education or university or what is required, in terms of academia or research, but you will be appointed chancellor just by virtue of the statute, the law, which says that we are making the governor the chancellor. But again, the essence there is the role of chancellor is only like a nominal role. Please put on this really gaudy looking gown, stand on the stage and give, like, some people their certificates as they walk past you, during a university convocation day. But what has happened is now these governors have started taking these statutory roles very seriously, and they've started exercising their sort of their right there, or trying to show their authority and power, trying to rein in vice chancellors, or trying to host conferences and symposia for various vice chancellors and so on and so forth. But the point here is very simple. The governors have nothing else to do. They're literally sitting there twiddling their thumbs. We have done, I think, a great disservice to our constitution. But of course, it is also, I think, in constitutional propriety, in morality, and in the right sort of conduct towards society, that governors must realize that unfortunately, when they take this role, their role is very limited. They do not have powers, they do not have authority, they do not have discretion. So, therefore, they must sit in their respective Raj Bhavans, whether they like it or not. And when the new government is to be called, that is when they can come and say, yes, we shall now call, so and so, to show whether he or she has majority. Or whenever a new chief justice of the state, of the high court, is to be sworn in, they can have a little tea party or an iftar party in the lawns. But beyond that, they must realize this. And I think, unfortunately, we have these big men with bigger egos who've been made governors, and they do not know what to do. So they're trying to now poke their noses, as men always, are known to do in many times, with little or no success at all. And in all these other places where, so therefore, to answer your question, yes, we can continuously legally challenge all the overreaches by all the governors, and we must do that, and we must be eternally vigilant. Politically, though, I think it is really a time to recast the role, the duties of a governor. uh, they have little or nothing to do, which is, you know what they say, right? If the person has little or nothing to do, they'll probably more likely than not get into trouble. So we always give all our interns, as I'm sure you do, RK, a lot of work to say, make sure you keep reading this again and again. Reread the front line front to back, and back to front, so that you don't get into trouble tomorrow. So we need to give governors something to do. Otherwise, I maybe all of you in the media fraternity must come together and keep doing something with the governors so that they are constantly engaged, and also because they seem to love the limelight and publicity quite a bit. So I think
Yeah,
those would be my suggestions.
yeah, got it. Now, Manu, what we have seen time and again is this overreach being extremely subtle in some cases. Like, for instance, we saw it on February 5th, 2017, the year after Jayalalitha died, that Paneerselvam is asked to step down as chief minister, and then Shashikala is elected as the leader of the legislative party by the ADMK. The ADMK was ruling Tamil Nadu at that point of time, and we didn't see the governor. Vidya Rao just vanished, and he appears in Bombay in some wedding or something, and in Delhi in some other meeting or something. But the guy is absolutely not in Chennai at all. So we have that scenario where this is essentially subverting the mandate of the ruling party. The ruling party was given that mandate, regardless of whether it was Jayalalitha or somebody else. We see that in Karnataka in 2018, just a year down the line, when clearly yes, didn't have the mandate to govern, didn't have the number of people, this thing to govern, and we see that in Maharashtra, which I mentioned earlier, where Devendra Fadnavis also didn't have the numbers to govern. We see across the board, what we see is that governors being extremely desirous of being right by the ruling party, being right by two people in the ruling party, Amit Shah and Narendra Modi, and they'll go to any extent to try and satisfy these two people so that they can get to the next position of power. We have seen Tamilisai holding court in Hyderabad, trying to sort out people's problems and trying to claim that people come to me, what can I do about it and whatnot. Now, I'm just Veeraraghav is joining from my handle. I'm just wanting to ask him, if he because he was close to the past in Delhi and he has seen what has happened in Karnataka. And of course, he is one of the few journalists who reported from Modi's Gujarat when Modi was still chief minister and 2002 happened. So let me just ask him also, who is joining from my handle again, just to get a feeling of what he thinks can be done, given his experience and given the fact that a lot of people talk to these primetime television hosts.
Yeah, thanks, RK. I mean, there's very little that I can add. I think it's all pretty obvious. But to add to the point that Manu was making, I think governors in our system were always agents of the center. They're nothing more than the agent of the central government in a federal structure. And I think the evolution, and correct me if I'm wrong, Manu, the evolution of the role of governor was when the Union of India was very fresh and the center still needed somebody in the states to give it feedback on center-state relations. So technically, the governor should have been someone who facilitated or helped center-state relations. And of course, it's changed all over the years, and I don't think it's a problem right now. Again, being politically completely neutral, I think the Congress had also abused the role of governor several times. For you can talk in recent past whether it was the role of an ESL Narasimhan, who was governor of an undivided Andhra Pradesh when they wanted to split the state, or whether it was an ND Tiwari in other cases. So the role of the governor is what is under question. The question then is that, do we still need that governor at all? So far, you have seen abuse of gubernatorial position only when there has been an assembly which is broken and there is no clear mandate. That is when the governor's role has come under severe criticism on how they have sided with one political party or the other, especially a political party which is in power at the center. So acting as an agent of the central government. Now, there are two problems here. One, do we need the role of a governor at all at this stage? Now, if you do, then there needs to be strong codification of what a governor can or cannot do. This argument that Manu raised is very important on the question of being a chancellor. Now, the chancellor is only a figurehead in most Indian universities, and the vice chancellor is the man who takes care of the academic. This one. The governor is supposed to be someone who shields the academic environment from political pressure, which is why there is a governor as the chancellor. That's the origin of the system, if I understand it right. Of course, it's been abused now. So one needs to do away with the position of a governor, if you really are in the interest of a federal structure where you respect strong state governments and you have a communion between Delhi and the state government. So, what happens then in the case of a state government or a law and order crisis where somebody needs to intervene, where the central really needs to intervene, whether there is a law and order crisis or in the case of a hung assembly? What does it happen? In those cases, the governor's role has to be strictly codified. There has to be enormous checks and balances. At the moment, the balance of power is extremely towards the center, and the governor, being the agent of the center, is obviously going to curry favors with the center. That's the reason why someone is placed as a governor in the first place. It is a political appointment. It is something carried out by the central government. What we are witnessing again and time and again is that since 91, in post Indira Gandhi era, I can even go back to 84 actually. After 84 till now, though of course 84 to 89 was a Rajiv Gandhi government which had a strong majority, this is the first time you're actually seeing a full majoritarian government at the center since 2014, right? So obviously the abuse of power will be there. And one needs to understand that our constitution and our codification process hasn't evolved to match up to protect against potential abuse of the post of governor in circumstances like this, when the legislative power is a brute majority, whether it's at the parliament or as a political force in the country, as a political ideological force in the country. So to answer your question, this is not just one, right? We've seen this in our independent history several times when the governor's position has been abused. And unfortunately, there has been no codification because there is no point talking about it in Chennai. You have to talk about it in Delhi, and the powers that be at Delhi will have to decide to go ahead and do that. I think it's important that there is serious legal and constitutional review of the position of governor. If not do away with it largely, at least make sure that there is strong codification of what a governor can do or cannot do.
Yeah, thank you very much, Raghav, for that. Uh,
Appointments, we cannot do away with the role of the governor because that is how the constitutional democracy has been structured. And in any change that goes against that would, I think, really sort of take a lot of fixing and changing and chopping, which, given our maturity and our sort of evolution as a constitutional democracy, we may not be able to do some sort of a massive change. It is akin to changing our parliamentary system to a presidential one, something similar to the American system. So I think those sort of changes would be too much. And generally, society only changes in iterations and not in drastic steps. So therefore, I do think what we need is greater sort of vigilance around how governors act. So again, thank you, Frontline. Thank you, Radhakrishnan, for this lovely opportunity to engage and converse on this important issue.